Good evening. I'm Alan Jackson, and welcome to Nashville. Just days from now, a significant change in the commander-in-chief. Our incoming president controls not only government agencies, but armed forces as well. Trump says he'll use his bully pulpit to help bring peace to the Middle East and to the Ukraine. Mr. Trump says he will address the growing threat from China and their aggressive attitudes towards all of us. He's also said that he'll eliminate the growing threat from terrorists here in our own country. Now, for making those statements, Mr. Trump has been widely mocked by the mainstream media. You know, I grew up in a barn in Tennessee. I suppose I could be wrong, but all of those objectives seems like they would be good for the American people. If I contrast that with President Biden, who just released suspected Al-Qaeda terrorists from a Guantanamo prison, it's an unsettling comparison, and the media seems to miss it. We've got to pay attention. Much of the church has been totally engulfed by this notion that our goal is to be tolerant, to be kind, not to bring any division or to bring any disruption. Well, Jesus himself said that I didn't come to bring peace, I came to bring division, even to the level of our families. I would submit to you that both biblically and historically, for what that's worth to you, that avoidance, appeasement, and apathy is not an effective strategy when you face evil. You cannot ignore evil. It has to be addressed. It'll be interesting to see what unfolds as we move forward through these next few months. And let's not leave it all in the lap of an incoming president. Let's take our time prayerfully asking God for His help for all of those who are providing leadership to us. Well, joining us now, the former commander of the USS Cole and military analyst, Kirk Lippold. Welcome back to our show, sir.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be on. Happy New Year.
Well, Happy New Year to you as well. Before we get to the threats around the world, let's talk about the threats here at home, beginning with the former enlisted American soldier who joined ISIS and then killed 14 people in New Orleans. He's just one of the thousands of unknown threats that the FBI director has spoken of. In part of the open borders from north to south, well, if you were advising the president-elect, would domestic threats and protecting the American people be where you would start?
I think that there's a misfocus in many ways that a lot of people are talking about domestic terrorism. This was clearly an act of domestic terrorism, but it was inspired by international terrorist group in ISIS. And while there is always going to be a need to look inward at the domestic threat, I think that the international environment is what we really need to be focusing on because they represent the true long-term strategic threats to the actual existence of the United States. So while that young man tragically did what he did down in New Orleans in mowing down those people in an ISIS-inspired radical Islamic attack, that should not be the focus inward when we have so many threats outward that we need to be focused on, especially at our borders.
Well, the intelligence is that ISIS is making a resurgence. How much of that is the result of withdrawing our forces from Afghanistan?
Absolutely. When we withdrew from Afghanistan, we lost that critical human intelligence aspect that will never be replaced. Because when you have eyes on the ground, and a lot of Americans need to remember that there will never be a substitute for actually being there to watch how the government's working, how the people are behaving, what the interaction is with the government and the people in trying to get stability in the military, how they are safeguarding their country. There can't be a substitute for that. And when you look at where Afghanistan sat, it sits in the middle of what I call the arc of instability between China, nuclear-armed Pakistan, Afghanistan, and a nuclear wannabe nation in Iran. So being there was critically important, and the withdrawal from that country I think is going to cost us very dearly in the long run.
Well, after 9/11, there was a lot of talk about how our security agencies didn't share information, and that's part of how the terrorists slipped through. Has anything substantively improved since then?
I think, Pastor, we've had a lot of improvement within the interagency or between the different departments and agencies throughout the government. But in many ways, the further we get away from the attack on my ship, which was 11 months before 9/11, when you look at 9/11, familiarity breeds contempt. And the fact that we've had a relatively small number of international terrorist inspired events here at home has given people a chance to rebuild those rice bowls and those walls up that need to come back down. And we need to have that interagency effort to ensure that we do stay safe in the long run. So while we're safe, if you see something, say something, put your head on a swivel and keep your powder dry at this point, because the threats are there, especially when you have 11 million plus illegal aliens in this country, most of whom we don't know who they are or where they came from.
Wow. Well, the global threats are growing. Now North Korea has tested a ballistic missile precisely while the Secretary of State was in South Korea. We already know that they've been helping Putin in Ukraine. Then there's China putting out videos of its increased military weaponry. Listen to how Mr. Trump's nominee described the state of our military after 4 years of Biden as commander-in-chief.
This was a team devoted to a mission that loved the country and wanted to serve. And our best performers were elevated into leadership positions, and our poorer performers were relegated or pushed out altogether. And that's what it's supposed to look like in a fighting force. And just over time, you started to see political prerogatives being pushed from the top that weren't focused on standards or accountability or meritocracy or lethality, but on sort of social just, politically correct priorities.
Do we have the assets in place to fight a two-front war if it comes to that?
We do not. Right now, the biggest problem the United States has is that our military over time has atrophied. It has become more bureaucratic and politically based, more focused on Washington, D.C., than those actual young men and women that are out there at the tip of the spear, on ships, in the ground, out there on the squadrons. And as a result, what you end up is leadership focused here in Washington and preserving their political connections rather than actual building a force that we need to. I will say this, the Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Franchetti, she in fact is the only service chief today that is out there saying that we must get a Navy in place as soon as possible for the coming conflict with China. Not a competition, not an adversary. She views China as the enemy, as we should. And when you look, as you mentioned, with North Korea, everything North Korea does has been aided and abetted by China. When you look at what China is doing in the Middle East in buying Iranian oil that allows them to still bolster their nuclear program. When you look at what China is doing in avoiding sanctions to make sure that there's a free flow of weapons and money into Russia that allow them to continue to prosecute the war in Ukraine, I'm going to go out on an edge and say, when you really look at what is happening around the world, we have already seen the beginning of World War III. It is out there happening with an integrated force between Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea that the rest of the world is going to have to deal with. And the only way that we're going to get that in a box is to have effective deterrence across the board with these countries and hold their governments accountable for their malign actions anywhere in the world.
Wow. Well, Putin says he will meet with Trump after he takes office, but in the meantime, Ukraine has mounted an offensive in Russia's Kursk region. Doesn't that make it more difficult for us to negotiate a ceasefire?
I actually don't believe it does. I think that when you look at what Russia did in this illegal invasion and the slaughter that they have executed against literally thousands of civilians throughout Ukraine, it is clearly an unwarranted conflict. And it is the largest conflict on the European continent since World War II. When President Trump wants to end that conflict, you have to remember, a lot of people complain about never-ending wars. They complain about the corruption within the Zelensky government. Well, my question would be, would you rather deal with a murderer in Putin, or would you rather deal with a corrupt regime that can eventually be reformed? I will take that corrupt regime any day versus dealing with a thug and a murderer who has shown time after time that will assassinate opponents. He will engage in conflict and slaughter innocent civilians, and will kill within his own country by the hundreds of thousands in putting those young men out there to fight in those regions. Taking Kursk gives us a negotiating point. Using our weapons that we have given to Ukraine to be able to launch attacks and be able to take the war home to the Russian people absolutely has to be done, and it is a negotiating tool that unfortunately President Trump needs to have in his hip pocket if he ever sits down with President Putin.
Well, let's take a short break now. If you want to jump in, you can send your emails to comments@alanjacksonnow.com. I'll be right back. We're back now with the former commander, Kirk Lippold. Outside of an actual world war, I don't remember so much global turmoil. We haven't even touched Syria, the Sudan, Haiti, Myanmar. Let's move to Israel and Iran and the hostages that are still being held in Gaza. With Trump taking over, Israel will have the backing it needs. Interestingly, President Biden has just approved a very large military aid package to Israel, but it came after more than a year of playing both sides. Do you think Hamas will release the hostages in fear that Trump will eliminate the rest of them if they don't?
I'm not sure. I think, like a lot of people, all we can do is hope and pray that Hamas will release the hostages, that they can be accounted for, whether they're alive or dead, and they get returned to their families, hopefully alive. But at the end of the day, I think what President Trump has done is something President Biden did not, and that is draw a line and make clear demands. And at the end of the day, the biggest challenge that President Trump is going to face isn't going to be with the terrorist groups like Hamas or Hezbollah. It is actually going to be with Iran. They continue to pursue a nuclear weapon. I think President Netanyahu in Israel is very clear-eyed and has operated with a moral clarity that the Biden administration did not, because he knows what the threat is to their country. He knows what that threat needs to be, what they need to do to address that threat. And hopefully the United States will give Israel the tools when they need them, in a time they need them, to be used as they see fit to ensure Israel continues to exist, whether that threat is from terrorist proxy groups like Hamas and Hezbollah, or whether it is from Iran proper and the Ayatollahs.
Well, Israel has taken a lot of heat, but they've also managed to dismantle Hezbollah, Hamas, and to some extent the Houthis. Some people here have been busy defending Hamas and those who've helped hide them in tunnels. But when a terrorist runs down an innocent citizen in New Orleans, you don't hear them defending ISIS, do you? Well, Netanyahu
Absolutely.
has done more to protect his people than Joe Biden did here. Listen to how the Prime Minister explains his actions.
We're going to follow events very carefully. If we can establish neighborly relations and a peaceful relations with the new forces emerging in Syria, that's our desire. But if we do not, we'll do whatever it takes to defend the state of Israel and the border of Israel.
Well, Commander, I wonder if some Americans feel less safe here than the people of Israel do, given the current leadership.
I think we absolutely do, and thank goodness there's only a few days left in the Biden administration. When President Trump comes in, he is going to face a unique challenge, because right now we don't know where the threats are. The United States has spent 4 years in a defensive posture and reacting to threats around the world, whether they have been against our forces globally, as in the Red Sea with the Houthi rebels, or whether they've been here at home, as we just experienced in New Orleans. So at the end of the day, President Trump is going to face that unique challenge. But I will go back to a saying that I've used for years: solve the problem, not the symptom. If you go after terrorist proxy groups, you're solving symptoms of a larger problem. The government of Iran needs to be held accountable for their malign actions. And until the United States is willing to do sanctions, maritime interdiction operations, and those things necessary to put Iran in a box, they are eventually leading us down a path where kinetic force may have to be used. In other words, we would go into conflict with them along with Israel to ensure that the region can stay safe, and more importantly, we as Americans can feel safe here at home.
Well, finally, you've made the case that we are not ready to defend America in a two-front war. Trump understands this, but money's going to be tight. Will he and the new Congress begin rebuilding our military before it's too late?
I honestly believe they will begin rebuilding the military. The biggest problem that you're going to face across the board and all the services is we have allowed the industrial capacity in the United States to atrophy over decades. That is not going to come back quickly. For years, we told young men and women, if you don't have a college degree, you're not worth anything. And consequently, look at the trades today. They're behind, they're catching up, but we literally, within the maritime and shipbuilding industry, which is 1/20th of what China possesses, we do not have the welders, the electricians, the pipe fitters, and others that we need in order to build the ships, the tanks, and the aircraft necessary for us to defend our nation. So it is going to take a large effort across the United States in a whole and in an industrial capacity in order to get the positions back into place and the people trained so that we can build out the military that hopefully will get funded and we need.
Well, Commander Lippold, it's always helpful to have you on. You are remembered for what you did when you defended your men on the USS Cole. We could use more people with your calm under pressure to help us through these troubled times right now. We hope you'll come back on the program again.
Thank you. It's been an honor to be on, and I will always be proud of my heroes on USS Cole.
Thank you, sir. Well, in a moment, I'll be back with some hope you can rely on, even in troubled times. Stay with us. In my opinion, in our most recent election, we received mercy from God. There's a new group of people going to provide leadership to Washington. The outcome is dependent upon more than them and their integrity. I believe it depends upon us. The most hopeful note in the election to me was that across the heartland of America, flyover country, you know, that part of the country where the deplorables live, the trash lives, my part of the country, multiplied millions of people raised their hands and said, we don't believe we're going in the right direction. We need to walk a new way. I believe what they said was right, and I believe what those of us in the heart of America do over these next few months is every bit as important as what the politicians who we're sending to Washington, D.C. will do. So I have an invitation for you. I want to ask you to join with me in reading through the Gospels for the next couple of months. If we'll commit to do that, we're going to read through Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It takes about 15 minutes a day. If we'll do that in about 60 days, we'll be through the Gospels. I'm inviting people all over the country to join me in this. Every place I have a platform or a voice, I've been extending that invitation. I have a reason for that. I believe when people take the time to open their Bibles and then turn their faces to the Lord, God will respond. It will bring His blessings to us. What those blessings will look like, how they'll be given expression, that's in God's hands. But let's you and me engage in a behavior that will invite the blessings of God. We can do this. 60 days in the Gospels, we'll be ready for Easter together. Well, stay with us. When we return, we're going to look at some of your emails. Thank you for taking the time to send us your emails. Your thoughts, perspectives, and your questions, they're an important part of the program. Catherine from Washington wrote, I've been enjoying you and your ministry for a while now. What do I like best? You don't sugarcoat the truth. I don't see you going along to get along. You do your best to give true understanding of the only truth, and that's what our Bible says. Well, Catherine, I think if more of us would make a commitment to honor the truth of Scripture, our world would be a better place. To be completely honest, at the end of the day, I'm afraid of my boss, not the one here in the building, but the one we'll all ultimately answer to. Steve and Gaitha from Columbia, Missouri. I used to live in Columbia. It's been a day or two. My wife and I have become regular listeners to the AJ Now Show and your Culture and Christianity podcast. Thank you for your service to the body of Christ in this season. Also, I've been thinking of a potential opportunity for you to interview Mike Huckabee for either of these programs. Knowing his and your profound love for the state of Israel, and now his being tabbed as potentially the new ambassador to Israel and also on TBN. Just seems like a great match for your programs. You guys could really help us understand what's happening on the ground. Well, I can't speak for the governor, but I'll give you my commitment. I am more than willing to travel to Jerusalem to do an interview with Mike Huckabee. And I agree with you. His voice has been an important voice in our country for a season now, and I'm excited about his role in Israel. Finally, Pamela says, I appreciate the honesty of your reporting and how you deliver it. I now watch your program every day at 4 p.m. Pacific time. and I watch your sermons on TBN. I've learned a lot from you, and I look forward to learning more. By the way, thank you for your sense of humor. Yeah, my wife just says I'm a smart aleck. Wherever you live in your country, I hope you'll watch our program. It's 7 p.m. Eastern Time, 6 p.m. Central Time, or you can find us on YouTube. All the programs are there. If you miss it live, go to YouTube and you can see all the programs archived there. Well, if you haven't yet, take a moment to send your emails to comments@alanjacksonnow.com. Your feedback and questions, they do a lot to shape our show. I'm Alan Jackson. You have a wonderful evening.